Welcome to yet another video on Java 8 concepts. So today's topic is about serialization, uh, how serialization works, what is serialization, what is deserialization, how it works in Java, what are the different classes available uh, which are implementing serializable interface, uh, what is serializable version ID when it comes to serialization and deserialization. Uh, invalid class invalid class exception is thrown. Uh, when it is being thrown, we'll look into that concept as well. Uh, what happens, like in what scenarios serialization will not happen? What are the keywords available? uh, what are the use cases, like what how it will behave when it comes to static variables, right? And we have the relationships, like is a relationship and has a relationship, how it behaves, right? And when it comes to serialization and deserialization, externalization interface. So this is an interface when it is being used up. We'll look into that. uh, we will look into the transient keyword as well, like what is exactly the transient keyword, where exactly we are going to use this, right? And what is this serialization work? So let's get started. So first, we'll start with what is serialization and deserialization. Now, basically, theoretically, when you see, right, what exactly serialization is, it is nothing but when you want to transfer one state to another state, right? The object has to be converted from one state to another state. Now, the source state is like in an object, and then the destination state is in byte stream, right? You wanted to convert it into any of their file, right? Or you wanted to transfer it over the network, right? So you have to convert that into an uh, uh, file, right? Or a byte stream, right? And how to do that, and what is the process, we'll look into it. But serialization is something, what is I said, like converting from an object to a byte stream, right? So similarly, the the reverse is like how to convert uh, a byte stream to an object, again back to an object, right? Is the process of deserialization, right? So identifying uh, how to convert from an byte to uh, sorry object to a byte stream is serialization, and the reverse, converting from a byte stream to a object, is deserialization, right? Now there is an interface which is serialization, right? I will just open that. If you serialize serialize Java serialize uh, serialize dot. Okay, we'll open string, right? We'll open the string class, which is an implementing the Java serializable interface, right? So if you see here, this is an interface. Now, what is this actually? It's a marker interface, right? So, now what is marker interface? So, marker interface is an interface which has got no methods, and it's a special kind of interface. You know what exactly is marker interface, right? So there is nothing it performs, like it doesn't has any specific method inside it, but it actually a denotion that this particular whatever implement classes which is going to implement this particular interface it of this particular type will be only serialized. So only those are eligible for serialization. If it is not implementing that interface, then serialization won't happen for this. So internally, Java checks for classes. If you want to persist that particular, the serialization process, right? You should be implementing this particular interface. Without this, you'll not be able to serialize it or persist. So this is one of the important steps when you're trying to serialize. So we have to implement this particular interface. So when you're trying to serialize any class, right, it will first check if it is implementing that or not. So Java will internally recognize this is and this is implementing an interface. So this can be serialized. Okay. So now if you look at this particular implementation, right, where exactly these are used, right? So when it comes to you're dealing with databases, right, and Hibernate, if you see, this is one of the ORM, right? If you see the entity classes, each of this particular entity classes is very trying to persist it, right? If you remember, like you have to mark it as an serialization. Unless that, you will not be able to persist that data. So JPA as well, right? So this is where exactly the implementation of this particular serialization interface has been used, and then internally the framework recognizes that this particular class is demarked as an serializable, so that it can be persisted, right? So this is where exactly this particular the implementation is being used up, right? uh, as I already showed you, string class, right? This is one of the internal library class where actually it make use of serialization, right? So we have another one which is character also, so which make use of serialization, yes, right? Now there is uh, serialization version ID. Now basically what exactly now, let's say you are trying to convert the object to a byte stream, right? Now how the framework will know that this particular object what has been converted is the same thing what has been are priorly already converted, right? So this serialization version ID, the one who is going to serialize it and the one that who is going to deserialize the object, right? In that particular class, there is a serialization version ID, right? It generated for an each class when you're in the process of converting that particular by a object to a string, byte stream, and while converting back to the byte stream to a string, this particular serialization ID is already generated by the and whatever it has been generated while serialization, the same serialization ID should be matched up while deserialization. Otherwise, it will throw an invalid class exception, right? So this is very important point when the interviewers ask you about what is the importance of serialization ID. So you can answer them that without this particular if there is a difference in this particular serialization ID when you're trying to deserialize, right, it will throw an invalid class exception, right? So it's very important that when you're trying to deserialize it, right, the same serialization version ID should be matched up, right? uh, Okay, so we'll look into a scenario where, in what scenario we'll be, there are certain attributes or data members we can skip to serialize it. In what scenarios, right? We'll look into it. Okay. Uh, Also, we'll look into the static members, right? Static data members, whether this will be able to, how it behaves when it is trying to uh, serialize and deserialize in context of static data members, right? Now let's see. First, we'll look into a general serialization process. So here, if you see, uh, there is a department class, right? I have written over there. Now, if you look at this, right, I have implemented this with a serialization, serializable interface, right? So now if I mark this and implementing this particular interface, and then if I try to serialize this, this will be internally marked. So Java will recognize that this is implementing the serializable interface, and then I have to serialize it basically. So what are the steps involved in serializing it? We'll see. But first of all, we'll create an object of it. Secondly, we will create an file output string where we'll pass on the location where it has to store it. So we can actually give the file name, whatever in what has to be stored, the byte string, right? Now this particular object output stream will take the input of that file output stream, and it will write that particular object. So this is one of the method where it will write this particular department into this particular file. So it will convert that particular into a byte string, and then once it is done, it is flushed and it closes it, right? So now let's look at this uh, by running this, right? Now if you see, it has already been serialized, right? Now if you let's try to open this particular file, okay? Now if you see, it is in the byte string, right? There are some do not characters which are able to recognize, but this is ultimately a byte string. It has been converted. Now as we already discussed, right? The same file we have to use it for deserialization. Now, uh, let's look at the process of deserialization. What are the steps? So, in this, we are trying to get that particular file path. We'll take as an input of that, and then we'll cast it. We'll create an object of an object output string, input string, and then from that particular input stream, right, we'll call the read object to get that particular department object. Now we have to cast it in order to get that particular department, right? Now once we run get this particular department ID, we will try to print that the values, right? Now if you remember, while serializing, right, we have given this particular values, right? It should be, when you're trying to deserialize, it should actually able to store or maintain that particular state, right? Should be assigning the same values to it, right? The same object should be created. Now let's see, we'll run this, right? Now if you see here, deserialization, we had given one an IT. Similarly we got this idea. Now, the important things to look at it here is that in this particular department, if you see, uh, let's say you doesn't want this particular field to be serialized. Let's say this is a password, or let's say this is not very important for you to store. You doesn't want it to necessarily load that particular object or create an object with that particular attribute, right? You want to skip that. It's not mandatory for you, or it doesn't has any importance. So why to save that particular unnecessary information, right? In that case, what we have to do is that we have to mark this particular field as transient, right? So in order to, it will skip this particular during the process of serialization. So let's say I've saved this and I will try to rerun this particular program, the serialization. So now it's again serialized. If you see, now when I'm trying to rerun this particular deserialization process, now if you see, earlier it was printing the IT, now it has printed the null. What has happened here is that whatever you are trying to mark the field as transient, right, those field will be skipped from serialization process. So there might be a use cases where you wanted to skip certain attributes, right? This might be the use case where you can make use of transient. Now there is another way where we can do that. Let's say we wanted to assign a default value, right? Okay, so okay, let's remove this. We have already defined one integer variable over here, which is code, and I have assigned it is an 500. Now if you see here, uh, I will create an object. Okay, let me run this, right. Now look how static will behave when it comes to serialization and deserialization. Now if you go with the exact understanding what is static, right, it belongs to a class and it's not belonging to an object, right. So whatever you are going to assign at the object level thing, it will not be stored or persisted. It will, while deserialization process, it will try to give the default value which is already there in the class. It will try to initialize with the default value which is already there in the defined in the class. Now if you see, I have already defined 500 as a default value to it, right. So now while creating this serialization, I am actually assigning the value as 100 over here. So while the process of serialization, I'm assigning the value as 100, which is at the object level. But when you're trying to deal with a static variables, right, it's class level, will not it will not persist the object level information when it comes to static. So we'll see, like, when you're trying to deserialize it, right, what will happen over there, whether it will printing the 100 or whether it will have the 500. Now if you see, it has printed 500 because while deserialization, what has happened is it has ignored that particular static variable, and then it has reinitialized with the variable over there, the default value. Hope hope you got what exactly the transient and the static behavior when in terms of serialization and deserialization. Okay, now let's say I comment it out, right, and I'm trying to serialize it, right? What happens, right? Let's say we will run this. What happened? Now if you see, there will be an exception thrown which is not serializable exception, because if you remember, I told, like, whether you have to persist or you have to store that particular object into a byte stream, it's mandatory that you have to implement this particular interface. Without this, you will not be able to persist that particular object to a byte stream. Okay, we'll rerun this and keep it. Hope you understood in what scenario you will not be able to exception is being thrown, right. Now let's look at the relationship, that is, we have two things, like, when it comes to composition and aggregation, right. And when you come to inheritance, right, when you're trying to inheritance, it is an easy relationship. Whether, let's say, you have a class A and let's say class B. Okay, and class B is actually extending it from class A. So now in that case, class A is and the class B also is a class A, right. It can be assigned it to a you can actually replace it with the instance of class B as well, right. When you're trying to instead of class A, we can actually also assign the class B as well, right. That is easier relationship, right. Now it comes to has a relationship, right. Let's say you are trying to define an interface a class over here, and you are trying to uh, let's say you initialize. I've created one employee class over here, if you see, right. So if I have not marked this as a serializer, if you see, right. But if you go inside this and if I try to private employee, now let's say I generate another getter constructor which is taking this as well, right, as an input, right. Now if I go to the serialization process, right, now instead of this, right, I am trying to employee code, let's say I'm generating constructor for all these particular fields, right. uh, So let's say I manually create it, right? Let's say if I just for the sake of it, I'm just creating it, okay? Um, it might not be required, but just for as this is a static level, it doesn't require to be assigned, but I'm still trying to differentiate and constructor over here so that you'll be able to identify it here, right? So while creating the instance, right, now what I will do is that I will now if you see, I will just create a new employee, okay, and I will mark it as one, and I will give the change well, department, right? You can see, okay, I have to swap it over here. I have to swap it over here in this particular field, okay. Now I create an object with the employee, right? Now when I'm trying to serialize it, right, let's see what happens. Now you see it is not allowing to serialize it. So now what has happened is that every uh, object or every class which you wanted to serialize, right, it should be definitely implementing that interface serializing, right? Now in this particular case, as we are not able to serialize this, right? We are getting an exception. Now let's say I mark this particular class to implement the serializable interface. Now let's see what happens when we try to serialize it. But if you see, now it has got deserialized, right? And let's see like what happens like when you're trying to deserialize it, right? We are going to uh, let's say I will print this, right? This is out dot println dot deserialization of an employee. It will be able to. Okay, I have not provided the getter and setters, but if we try to implement the getter setters, right, we will be able to get that particular value inside it, right? The default, whatever value it has been assigned, right? So that is the reason it is not. Uh, let's say if I mark it as an public, just for an uh, to make it as an visible, right? Let's say this is not a good practice, but I'm just in order to showcase you what will be the value of it. I will just try to serialize it and I will try to deserialize it, right? So I will just create out dot println. Now from the department, so if I try to get the name of the employee, right, we'll see the instance, right? From this particular thing we'll try to, okay, let's say we'll run this, okay, what will happen we'll see. Now if you see, we got that particular object which is already there, right? So from that particular, let's say let's run this and then we'll see like what will happen. We'll serialize it, then when we'll try to get the value, right? Yeah. Now if you see, we has got the 4 over here. Now although I have marked it as an public over here, you should not be marking, it should be properly encapsulated. uh, okay, now let's look at the external eyes interface. If you see this particular serialization, right, we don't have much control about like what happens internally when you're trying to serialize it, right? It's internally being handled by the Java. So how, like, the converting a particular object to byte stream, right? Uh, we have no control. It's internally done, right? But if you wanted to have a more granular control, how to convert what things to be done, right? Logic has to be written specifically, right? We make use of this particular external allies interface, so that you can convert that particular byte stream to a compressed format, right? So this is not a macro interface, but it has got two methods, which is write external and read external, right? So this will give you, like, while trying to serialize and deserialize, the logic to be precisely written, what to gain more control of what the logic should be there to, while serialization and deserialization, right? Okay. Now, you already looked into transient. Now, what is this serialization? Now, you must have already known, like, Java gives you a lot of inbuilt tools, right? Let's say Java compiler, right? Java C. When you're trying to compile any Java class, right, you make use of the Java C. You give the class name and the .java file, right? It will compile it. And then when you want to try to run it, right, you make use of Java tool, right? So it's nothing but internal things which is provided by the JDK. Similarly, there is an serialize work serial work for generating that particular serializable UI, right? So we there is a way where you can generate that. So this is, you have to invoke on the terminal, right, with the help of the serial word, and then give the class path, then give the directory of that, and then the class name. So when you hit this particular thing, you will be able to get that particular serializable ID of that particular class, right? So hope you got the concept of, like, what exactly does serialization and deserialization about, and various uh, behavior when it comes to static and transient, in what scenarios will be an invalid class exception, and if you are not serializing any class and then trying to implementing the serializer interface and you're trying to serialize it, what exception it is prone. We looked into that as well. Hope you got the serialization concept uh, and deserialization concept with the help of this particular video. Thank you.